state of fear and misery. No, we are listening anymore. And live in a constant state of fear and misery. No, we are live in a constant state of fear and misery. No, we are listening anymore.
Hello, everybody. Today is Sunday, December 30th, and we're bringing you Block Digest 151, the season finale at block height 556,258. What's going on?
Man, season finale is right. I mean, I was going back through the images. It looks like we started the season back in the summer. So, yeah, like half a year here and closing it out, right? The end of the year. A lot of stuff been going on this year. So, should be a good final season finale, getting everything together before our little 2 week break here. So, yeah, how's it been going for you this morning, Janine? Or this evening over there, Janine?
Well, mostly was just looking at how many blocks were between the first episode of Block Digest and today's episode, and it is indeed somewhere right past 75,000. 75,000 blocks ago, we did the first episode. So pretty interesting. Oh, and your cat decided to join us.
Oh, hey, Bugs. Yeah, 75,000 blocks. My goodness. Yeah, we need to start. We need to keep up with the block clock measurement. So, 75,000 blocks, 5 seasons down. Let's see how many thousands of blocks for another 5 seasons. And yeah, we change things up here. So maybe our seasons will get shorter or extended. We don't know. We'll have to see. Could be 150,000 blocks.
But, in interest of the season finale, we've kind of been covering the OpTech newsletter for a while now, just because with the main stories we're covering, we've been getting kind of really tight on time. And, honestly, I hope most of you are actually reading these on your own anyway at this point. But we thought we'd start off with the year in review and just kind of buzz through all the shit that's happened this year. So the last newsletter for the year is pretty much just a month-by-month breakdown of all the big technical improvements that have happened this year. So let's just dive into it. Starting in January, the Reckless movement kicked off, and despite Lightning being live on mainnet a little bit before that, this is when businesses really started tinkering around and integrating things while everything was very immature and the whole Reckless meme took off. So that's pretty much been a steady thing this whole year. It was also the publication month for the Schnorr-based MuSig multi-sig scheme put together by Greg Maxwell, Andrew Palestra, Yannick Surin, and Peter Wulla. So this was pretty much the start of really tinkering with the big problem child of Schnorr, which is a multi-sig that can't be manipulated to create technically valid signatures, but fraudulent in the fact that they're not signed by the intended parties. So that's kind of been the real core mathematical problem in dealing with Schnorr, is setting things up in a way where you can't just kind of set things up in a way that allows you to remove keys and then sign with parties missing and still have a valid transaction. And January is also when Greg Maxwell came up with the Taproot scheme, which was a optimization of mast to allow more complex scripting conditions in a little more private manner than the vanilla mast implementation, where you could spend the normal condition without actually revealing that it was ever a mast script unless some of the other paths were used. And following in February, Greg Maxwell hit it out of the park yet again and came up with Graftroot, which was a way to kind of shoehorn in new complex spending conditions after the fact. So you could actually send coins to a script and then without moving them to another one, kind of delegate different spending conditions. So let's say you have 3 people who are able to spend these coins. They would actually be able to give the ability to other people to spend those coins in certain conditions without actually moving them from that address. So that, especially when you start looking at, potential legal agreements or things like inheritance, like that is a very powerful thing, and that you can like delegate spending ability with the coins just sitting there unmoved. So it's a huge efficiency gain, a huge privacy gain, and just a huge utility gain. And then also in February, Roast Beef and Connor Frompknecht, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, came up with a multi-path routing scheme for Lightning that did not link all the routes of a path, or all the different paths of a payment, so that they could be linked together as a single payment, which was a huge privacy improvement for Lightning, obviously. That brings us into March, and honestly, the biggest news in March was BIP 322. And this BIP was kind of created to address a long-standing issue in that signing arbitrary messages with Bitcoin keys doesn't really work with anything except the pay to public key hash, because the way it works is pretty much with the address derived from the public key and the signature. You're able to mathematically figure out the key to verify the signature. And for things like pay to script hash, SegWit, other things, there's not really a standardized way, because it doesn't work the same way, to have arbitrary messages that can be verified. And so this BIP was set up to create a new verification scheme for signatures, so that any key connected to any address type could actually sign arbitrary messages, which is, it's not like operation critical for anything, but it was kind of an annoyance, because you couldn't do things like prove possession of a balance, prove that you had an address that spent money to somebody, and then things like that, which do have different, audit use cases or business use cases for things like proving entitlement to a refund and so on. In April, Christian Decker, Rusty Russell, and Roast Beef dropped the L2 proposal, as well as I believe Channel Factories were dropped at the same time, and the SigHash no input BIP, which would allow a transaction or a signature that would be valid not just for one specific output, but any output that uses the exact same script. And so this really, in my opinion, laid the groundwork for most of the real long-term utility I see coming from Lightning Network, like actual efficiency that will scale beyond, a few tens or hundreds of millions of people just being able to use it very conservatively in regards to block space. And I think, this is probably one of the most important things to really get into the protocol in the short to midterm, aside from Schnorr signatures, to really get like a viable second layer that's scalable in a way where we're not going to run into the we need bigger blocks or this will stop working argument all over again. So that was a huge improvement. May, a draft BIP for the Dandelion transaction relay protocol was dropped. And so that is pretty much a proposal where you would send a transaction to a single node, which would relay it to a single node out to a certain depth, and then blast it out to the entire network, so that it's not really viable to tie a transaction's propagation to an individual node, which is something that will be a huge help in terms of the like network level of privacy, because you can do a lot of things to really protect yourself on chain, but if you're leaking information on the network level, it's not really a big jump from there to kind of undermine your on-chain privacy gains. That brings us into June, where Matt Corello dropped his Better Hash proposal, a kind of replacement or extension for the Stratum mining protocol that would allow transaction selection for miners to be a lot more decentralized. So you would still have to really kind of trust a pool entity to collect the block rewards and then actually pay those out to individual miners, but it would allow miners to have their own transaction selection for the block templates that they're constructing. And so this way, even though miners have to financially trust the pool to actually pay them, they don't have to trust the pool to not censor transactions. And so, theoretically, this could really help the censorship resistance of, a transaction actually making it into a block. And as well, this was also the month that a vulnerability was published that would allow a fake SPV proof to be constructed for a transaction that's not actually in a block. And while this was pretty theoretically interesting, ultimately the cost of doing so was in the millions of dollars. And so realistically, it's not really that practical of an attack, and it's very simply dealt with by running a full node. Also, this was when Satoshi's Place kicked off. That brings us to July, where Peter Woolley dropped the draft BIP of the Schnorr signature proposal, which is obviously a huge thing. And, hopefully he stops getting distracted by other things and gets that finished in the next year or two. It was also the month that the pay-to-endpoint CoinJoin payment proposal was dropped, where you would effectively have a person making a payment have the receiver of the payment create an input in the transaction as well, and make it look like both inputs belong to the same person based on how blockchain analytics heuristics actually analyze transactions. And so merchants who support this can actually not only help anonymize their customers, but also gain a benefit in that it's condensing their outputs as they're receiving transactions. So there's really a twofold benefit from this. Next up into August was a revised version of BIP 151, which is end-to-end encryption between Bitcoin nodes by default, which I think is a hugely important thing to actually get out there, because without running over Tor, you're effectively open to eavesdropping by your ISP, and they can pretty much see every packet of data that's going to and from your Bitcoin node. And that's something that can really be used to de-anonymize users by looking at transaction relays. Because for a node to really determine, or for another Bitcoin node to determine whether you were the original source of a transaction, they would have to pretty much have your node surrounded and see that it came from there first. Whereas, entities like an ISP, they're pretty much looking at everything. And so somebody like that could actually start tying a lot of information together if you're not running over Tor or through a VPN or some other kind of encrypted connection beyond what would be built into your node. Excuse me, throat is getting dry a little bit.
All right, that's a lot to cover. It's been a busy year.
Mm-hmm. All right, now up to September, which was the inflation bug incident with versions of core between 0.14 and 0.16.2 being vulnerable to a transaction having two of the same input, which would have passed validation and actually resulted in illegal coin supply inflation. And that was a bit of a shit show, given an altcoin developer who publicly just blasted what was actually going on in this bug after he ran the patch for his the Qtum client that he was maintaining, and pretty much turned what was a very low-key patch without really disclosing the nature of the bug into having to publicly acknowledge the severity of the bug and get everybody upgrading as fast as possible. And I do believe there are a decent number of vulnerable nodes out there, but at this point, all of the major businesses and mining pools have upgraded. So it would really take a lot of money and effort at this point to try and exploit it, and wouldn't really get anywhere except maybe being able to trick some unupgraded nodes for a block or two before the legitimate chain actually overtook that. And in October, we had the fifth Scaling Bitcoin conference, which I'm sure most of you remember my opinions on, was mostly a bunch of pointless circle jerking. One instance of proposing a network attack and framing it as a mechanism for upgrading. Although there were a few interesting talks, the two that jump out immediately at me were Roast Beef's coverage of some of the long-term issues with channel factories and his ideas on how to solve them, and then a proposal called state chains, which was kind of an interesting hybrid of like a quasi-federated side chain kind of system that was also in a way compatible with Lightning Network. And those are two things, if you haven't actually looked at any of the content from that conference, I would highly recommend going back and watching. One, just as kind of a really long-term look at where the Lightning Network is going over the next 10 or so years. And the other, just like a really interesting kind of unique idea with its own trust model and trade-offs. And then November, 2 months to go. November was the month of discussion over the 1.1 Lightning protocol specification. And so two of the big issues here, we're looking at multi-path payments, or AMP, which earlier in the year Roast Beef came up with a more private mechanism for, and then splicing, which would allow a user to either add or remove funds from a channel without actually completely closing it, so that the remaining balance could actually be used in the interim while the splice was confirmed on the main network. And so this was really a huge step forward in actually getting these things specified so that different developers can start building them out in a compatible way. And then December, pretty much the big news from here was the mini sketch proposal that we covered recently, looking at making set reconciliation work towards a more efficient relay of mempool contents to save a very large amount of bandwidth for nodes that could either be used to connect to more peers or just wind up with a net savings in bandwidth. And so really looking at all of this year has been a steady nosedive from an all-time high of 20,000 down to around 4 where we're at now. But I think looking at all of this, everybody can see that there has been absolutely no delay in development or people building things, and I would say a huge increase in the pace. So despite all of the short-term noise that adds up to the price, there is a shit ton of work going on to actually make this a scalable value transfer platform, and that's not going to stop just because of some noise that might upset short-term traders.
Oh yeah, man, it's been an incredible year. I mean, in the technological advancements, as far as like immediately think about Wasabi and the Chaumian coin join and the way that that's, hit out there, and a lot of people are using that, and the way that we're actually testing these new off-chain governance models on Lightning, on mainnet. And I mean, it's just for a long time we sort of hypothesized like, oh, we could do this, we could do that, but we've seen SegWit adoption move forward. I mean, we've seen the hash rate go up. There's just been a bunch of stuff going on this year with not just technological advancements in the protocol, but within the mining industry. And I mean, it's just been even things like that, like the GUI wallet, Zap, like things like that, where it's like we didn't have this stuff last year. And also just like things like Satoshi's Place, where it's like some interesting things just sort of pop out of the air in the development. And yeah, it's been an amazing year, and I don't see it slowing down at all either. This pace is picking up rapidly, and more developers are seeing that this is a proper way to scale this kind of network. So yeah, it's definitely going to keep going forward.
Yeah, and my favorite section of the newsletter, this end review, is actually the conclusion where they say that people often request roadmaps for Bitcoin development, but based on what's been happening in the last year, that seems like it would be a hard task because everything is moving a lot faster than pretty much anyone expects. Like, especially with the Lightning Network going to mainnet in January and February, that was definitely not planned at all. And in fact, the Lightning developers, as we saw with Reckless, were not anticipating that, and they kind of got forced into doing that because people were so excited to start testing it. So yeah, that doesn't, I mean, there is a roadmap in the sense that if you're subscribed to the Bitcoin developer mailing list and you're reading the stuff on GitHub, I mean, that's basically where the roadmap is. That's where the discussion is happening about when changes are going to happen and what changes are going to happen. But it's hard to organize it into, one coherent page with, precise dates for everything. And maybe the sequence will get mixed up. Like that's really hard to do when not only is everything happening so fast, but you don't have, a company or a foundation that is managing any of that organization. They're not saying we're going to do this on this date. The times where a date is actually set and kept is rare. It's like a special event when that happens. So just from now on, you should basically expect that for the majority of things, it's probably going to come sooner than you expect.
Yeah, it's really great to I don't know, just see all this open source development, and just sort of like throwing this technology out there and sort of letting the market sort of pick and see what's best for what out there. And yeah, it's real hard to try and say like this is the roadmap when there is so much stuff coming on. But I think it's we're learning a lot about the way that this whole system works this year. It's been pretty interesting, that CVE and the way that the community responded quick to that, and you kind of see a little bit more of the response system. And yeah, these 51% attacks on lower value networks, and just sort of the game theory of it all. There's been a lot learned this year, except it is still a bunch of people trying to grab metrics and say, well, this says that and that says this. There's a lot of people saying a lot of things, and it's hard to come to a consensus, but we'll keep watching the development. The market will decide.
Alrighty then, I guess into the next one. So I am betting that there are a lot of Litecoiners losing their shit. So a while ago, yeah. So a while ago, back in May, Cornet Ploy, that can't be right, but this gentleman posted on the Lightning mailing list a worry that he had about people making payments through different base networks using the Lightning network, creating an issue where somebody might just delay a transaction to kind of speculate on changing prices between different cryptocurrencies. And really, the two solutions that he had to that, I don't think address the issue. And the first was to kind of have a latency-based monitoring for payments that take forever to confirm and build a reputation system in order to blacklist people who abuse this to speculate on price. And the issue there is the whole system is synonymous. So I could just create one reputation and make good payments and then burn it on a speculation, while setting up another one making payments and burn it on speculation, and so on and so on. And there would really be no way to kind of prevent that, because I can just spin up a new reputation like that. And the second potential issue is that you would put somebody else in charge of actually confirming the payment. And so that brings up its own issues of, well, some degree of trust being required and reputation to have third parties facilitating this. And that kind of destroys the whole notion of a trustless payment across different networks with Lightning. Well, recently, somebody who responded to the initial thread in May kind of broke down a little more articulately and in depth why he thinks that this is just not a solvable problem. And it's effectively that when you set yourself up on, in this example, the Bitcoin side and the Litecoin side, and then route from Bitcoin to Litecoin through a Lightning node that handles both networks, what you're doing is pretty much making a call option. And so an American call option, which is kind of a trading contract where you buy the right but not the obligation to purchase something at a certain price. And the way that these are generally constructed in markets is you pay a premium for this contract. So you pony up some amount of money that you pay no matter what, whether you actually exercise the option to purchase the goods. And if you back out, the seller of the contract keeps that premium. And if not, then you pay at the agreed upon price before the expiration of the contract. Well, the issue with this dynamic across multiple chains on Lightning Network is it's free. Like there is no premium. Like setting up that HTLC across both chains costs you nothing. And so you can set that up. If the price of Litecoin goes up against Bitcoin, then you finish the payment and sell the Litecoin at a profit. If it doesn't, then you just let it fail and it costs you absolutely nothing. And so the whole dynamic here is that all of these nodes that would bridge Bitcoin and Litecoin or whatever other network would have all of their liquidity constantly eaten up by people doing this because it costs nothing. And really his notions of how to solve this just completely don't solve this at all. And the first one is to have a failed Lightning payment cost money. Well, that just breaks the Lightning network completely. Like the whole reason that routing can be dealt with is because a payment failure is free. It costs nothing. If that payment fails, you try another route, you try until it goes through. Like failing doesn't cost you money. So if you try to introduce a cost there, you pretty much break Lightning for payments. The second idea would be to have these nodes increase their fees. But all this does is make a wider spread. So you could still do this. It would just have to be a higher price increase to make it worth redeeming the contract. And to boot, that makes it more expensive to transact from Bitcoin across to Litecoin. So you're disincentivizing that as well. The second or the third issue would be to limit the length of a time lock for any asset that or transaction that crosses assets. But that introduces weird centralization issues, because when I start making a payment, my time lock is the longest. The next hop is slightly shorter. And so the more you limit that time lock, the more you're going to centralize payments across networks, because it can only do so many hops before it can't work. And so ultimately, this pretty much just makes it completely not viable to have a Lightning network that facilitates payments across different crypto networks. Like, just the economic incentives here break it, because all of that liquidity would just get eaten up by people speculating on a free call option that costs them absolutely nothing if they don't redeem it. And like, this is just like, I don't see any way to deal with this. Like, this is just, unless a whole fundamentally new idea to address this is created, or I am missing something beyond fundamental, this just isn't going to happen. Like, Lightning Network needs to function on a single network, a single asset. And with this issue, the entire meme of Lightning Network letting all kinds of different cryptocurrencies seamlessly facilitate payments across each other is just not going to happen.
Yeah, this year we're learning a lot about following Bitcoin development, the way that it goes, and you just sort of port over what Bitcoin's doing and, grab it and say, hey, we're doing that too. And because, last year, Litecoin sort of, everybody was saying Litecoin led the way in SegWit. And I mean, that's not incorrect. I mean, they sort of grabbed it and ran with it. And then, sort of just gobbling up everything that Bitcoin does to try and keep that testnet meme or silver to gold meme. But, Vertcoin was doing that to Litecoin. Everything that Litecoin did, Vertcoin did. And we're seeing now that, that the hash rate fell, that, these lower value networks are really at risk, following Bitcoin development, that, when times get tight around Bitcoin mining, you might see a lot of, some unexpected activity on your network that could result in basically just your entire value proposition sort of falling out from underneath you. I mean, blacklist and failed payment cost on Lightning Network. I mean, yeah, what's the point in there now? And I mean, all this off-chain governance and governance models that are built out from, developments being made now. I mean, you could follow in the footsteps of this stuff, but yeah, you're going to be feeling the pain whenever times get tight. And, especially, I mean, I've heard a lot of different things about, the way that atomic swaps could actually hurt these other networks, as far as just like a quick way to route liquidity into Bitcoin, and, those networks could fail quickly. I mean, it's with risk. And I mean, nobody really wants to talk about that risk. And, it's things like this and observations like this that really kind of expose it. And, similarly with those 51% attacks on Bitcoin and B Gold. And I mean, this is where it is kind of like you always hindsight 2020 looking back. I mean, we kind of, could hypothesize and everything, but until it's actually on mainnet and happening, I mean, then you really, really start to see the problems and people start to get hurt. I mean, I know there's a lot of Litecoin bag holders out there. Like I said, it was a powerful meme last year, and a lot of people jumped in on it. I'm not going to lie. I was kind of part of that whole, like, hey, Litecoin needs to lead the way on UASF, and we need to figure out how this is going to play out. And I mean, at the time, it was something that was a very important, like computer science, game theory, the way it was going to play out. And even still, it played out different on Bitcoin. I mean, because Litecoin has got just a different consensus model. I mean, they've got a creator and he's here and he'll talk. And so it's kind of easy to get to the table. And yeah, hindsight's 2020. And I know some people are holding bags and, yeah, I mean, some of it's just like a harsh reality and, just take it as a lesson learned and, keep moving forward.
I mean, it's like there needs to be more than a meme when you start trying to absorb value into something. And things just don't always work out the way the meme wants it to. And I mean, it's like the entire narrative of all of these shit coins that try to just be like, we're not competing with Bitcoin, we're just trying to help it. It's like, it's nonsense. It is complete and utter nonsense. And I mean, there are a million other reasons why just this kind of use of Lightning Network won't work. This is just the most recent one, and I think one that's just airtight and stands solid on its own. But this is absolutely not the only thing that's going to stop Lightning across Bitcoin and Litecoin from allowing Litecoin to be the air quote payments coin. Like it's gibberish. And like you need to just step back, especially when you're investing money in a space like this, and actually look at reality, data, and logic. Like if you just go investing based on memes, you're going to have a bad time.
That's a great way to put it. I saw Roger Ver put out a new video, and it was like him with an Excel spreadsheet, the Lightning Network, off-chain scaling and on-chain scaling, and he was like going through the statistics, trying to like prove to you like how this is better than that, and it's yeah, just watch out. The memes can hurt you. So moving on, right? I mean, Janine, did you have anything to say about this Litecoin atomic swap issue?
Not really. No, it's just yeah. The whole Litecoin silver to Bitcoin's gold. I mean, that's like I'm one of those people that, I'm not too bothered by the presence of altcoins because my response is just let the market settle out. It doesn't really bother me unless there's like blatant fraud happening or people's money is getting stolen. Yeah, I that's really all. Don't have much comment. I do find it interesting though regarding just the co-op stuff. That yeah, I think people just assume, oh, you can just switch the coins and that's it. But it's not just that. There's all kinds of economic consequences that we haven't really gotten into because I mean, sure, we've tested atomic swaps with Litecoin, but there's still a lot of things that could possibly go wrong, and or the economic incentives could be off, which doesn't surprise me because like it's a big deal to try and make a trustless or find a way to do a trustless exchange without an exchange. That's a big deal. That's never really happened before outside of obviously direct paper currency or metal coin currency swaps.
Oh yeah, and let me just say real quick before you move on, Rick. Like I'm not saying that this is going to prevent like exchanging between different assets atomically. I'm saying that this is going to completely kill the notion that like I can pay in Bitcoin and you receive Litecoin as a merchant. Like the liquidity won't be there. The ways to try and deal with this are going to add like disproportionate fees to that. Like it won't make sense. But like you can definitely swap assets in a trade. But like seamlessly paying across multiple networks, I think this completely kills that.
And honestly, that trustless swap and a trade, that's kind of where I've heard this theory about you could drain a coin very quickly, where somebody can just like, yeah, you know, they could just move seamlessly from Litecoin to Bitcoin. So how would that not, you know, make it spiral out quicker? But yeah, like let's just keep moving forward in these memes and coins. And, you know, there's a real powerful meme that we talk about here regularly, and that is, you know, Bitcoin does help promote freedom from tyranny. So, all right, guys, I'm sure you saw it on Twitter or Slack. The mainstream media, at least, Alex Gladstein of Time Magazine, to be more precise, wrote a very well articulated piece on how Bitcoin promotes freedom and offers a way out from authoritarian regimes. Sorry, I've been kind of struggling with that word all morning. So this is a subject we've talked about extensively here on the digest when we cover those stories like the Blockstream satellite and Bitcoin privacy enhancements like with Wasabi and Samurai. Those are things we get excited about because it helps promote the censorship resistance of the network to help these people in you know, dire straits. So when we discuss new laws and regulations on top of the geopolitics and macroeconomics, it's because we know this is a fight for freedom and liberty. Like Andreas said, governments aren't putting Bitcoin to the test. Bitcoin is putting governments to the test. And so it's something I was excited to see being pumped out there on Twitter, because a lot of times the majority of the crowd kind of gets lost in what exactly Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a stock, or it's all about fundraising. Time has a wide range of publication. Oh yeah, Time Magazine has a wide range of publication, and I think it's a good thing when more people get the word that this technology is more than just making money. It's about helping people protect their value with a new form of money. I saw a local friend I'd never expect to tweet this out, push out the tweet with this link, and I've heard some say on YouTube, "Oh well, we all know this. It's nothing new. Why does this get this much attention?" And actually, there are a lot of people who don't understand this fact, and people who work in blockchain that I know. I mean, they've got their heads down and they're working on engineering problems and in other areas of the space, and you know, they have different experiences to us, and you know, they don't really even know that this is even a problem through their perspective, as far as like why money needs to be censorship resistant and inflation and how that could hurt someone. So now Alex of this, the guy writing this, mainly talked about Venezuelan citizens using Bitcoin to help escape the tyranny of their currency being inflated like crazy at the will of Maduro. We all know about that. We've been covering it extensively. He also touches on how this helps these people in Zimbabwe going through a similar issue with tyrannical leader and an inflating currency. Russia from freezing bank accounts, China from state surveillance. And he also covers how currencies like the petro could be used to put an even greater Orwellian boot on the throat of its citizens, because that situation gives ultimate control of the network to the regime. Then he touches on new tech coming out to even further help Bitcoin achieve its goal of becoming global censorship resistant money of choice, with advancements in privacy and second layers like the Lightning Network. Overall, I thought it was great in its simplicity to convey this message of how Bitcoin helps enable liberty from tyranny. I mean, it wasn't a very long article. People could read it relatively quickly. And that's a hard thing to make economically, your words get the message across. And so, yeah, it was really good to see. And speaking from experience, as far as trying to get that message across, I mean, to, you know, at individuals of the meetups, it's like you can very easily get sidetracked or lost in your thought. And so, you know, it's good to see a very well articulated short article that sort of just puts that out there as what we're trying to do here. And yeah, so we've got some stats from this other article about how local Bitcoin's volume has been exploding recently in Venezuela. It saw a jump of 11% from just over 1,700 Bitcoin the week of December 15th to over 1,900, coming close to 2,000 Bitcoin the week of December 22nd, which is the highest ever recorded activity on local Bitcoins. And the article talks about what's encouraging that growth, saying, quote, the IMF reported back in July that the Latin American country was on track to hit an inflation level of 1,000,000% by the close of this month. 1 million. To give you some context, inflation in the U.S. is 2.2%, and recent Federal Reserve hikes caused a severe round of backlash from business, even President Trump saying that the Fed has, quote, gone crazy, and that's at a 2% interest rate, and these guys are going up 1,000,000%. So then director of the Western Hemisphere Department of International Monetary Fund, Alejandro Werner, says, quote, if you thought 1,000,000% was out of control, that figure could reach as much as 10 million by the end of 2019. So while these tumultuous times are moving forward, at least we know there is Bitcoin by people's side to help offer an escape from these tyrannies. And we just have to keep working on what we are doing, spreading the word and educating people and helping people come to understand the technology and onboarding people in a meaningful way to where they could come to trust the network. And, I was just really excited and jazzed about this article. This is one of those things where it's hard to basically just boil it down and say Bitcoin means freedom and what exactly that entails. And so I was excited to see it. Like I said, I saw somebody from here in town, like a pretty prominent developer on other networks, tweeting out about it, and it's just been good to kind of see here towards the end of this year and everything that's happened this year. I've seen personally developers kind of come to this understanding that there's something more going on than just like some interesting computer science engineering, and that that this can help enable people in a way that we haven't had the ability to in the past. So I was super excited to see it and read it and just sort of boil it down and just be like, well, this is, like I'm saying, it's articulated really well. But did you guys read the article, or did you catch some of it on Twitter? I know that it was, like I said, it's being pumped out there a lot. Did you catch it?
No, I didn't actually have a chance to read it, but it is kind of interesting given the timing of the whole Patreon MasterCard shit and all of the people in the so-called intellectual dark web starting to look at cryptocurrencies and alternatives, that something like this is published in a place like Time. Like, it seems like it's perfect timing to start dragging people's minds in the right direction.
That's certainly an interesting theory. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. I mean, there's definitely been some, background commotion about how exactly to route around that sort of problem. And like I'm just saying, I mean, we kind of have to keep our head down and educating people to where they do understand it. And Time Magazine does have a wide reach. So that is pretty interesting timing. But like we're saying, I mean, this is kind of what we understand. And, one of the main reasons why I think we're doing what we're doing. And so it's good to see that message spread pretty wide and far, and to a lot of people that, could quickly digest what exactly that means, because, there's a lot of people that they look at it and they kind of get lost down another rabbit hole or a tangent, and, they don't really come to that understanding. And, it takes a while for people to keep coming back to get that. So hopefully, it did grab a wide audience, and a lot of people did, grasp a new meaning on what Bitcoin could be. So, but that's that's the powerful Bitcoin meme is Bitcoin is freedom, liberty from tyranny.
Any input, Janine?
No,
Yeah.
but we may shortly have someone joining us.
Woo!
Special guest, maybe. Gonna have to wait on that one. But what else has been going on this morning? I know that you grabbed something going on with maybe a big tweet storm.
Yeah, so many of you have probably seen the very long thread from Tuur Demeester, and when I say very long, I mean 50 tweets long. He actually numbered them. And he basically did this Twitter list of criticisms about Ethereum's architecture, economics, and marketing strategy, mostly. And at a number of points, he not only references prior research that he has done over the years to back up those criticisms, but he also references tweets which showed that he himself used to be excited about the possibilities of Ethereum that he believed would come to fruition. In the third that I've followed Ethereum since 2014 and feel a responsibility to share my concerns. And then later in tweets 44 and 45, he says, do I have a conflict of interest? ETH is a publicly available asset with no real barriers to entry, so I could easily get a stake. Also, having met Vitalik and other Ethereum founders several times in 2013 and 14, it would have been doable for me to become part of the in crowd. Actually, I was initially excited about Ethereum smart contract work. This was before one of its many pivots. And things which concerned him ultimately ended in a change of heart from optimism to more skepticism, which included the circumstances of the Ethereum token launch and how it could be easily classified as a securities offering despite that being given a pass by the SEC, the litany of as of yet undelivered promises about various roadmap and scaling expectations, especially with the Casper and sharding upgrades, their constant claiming that proof of work is environmentally unfriendly or that proof of stake can guarantee as much immutability as proof of work, various people, including Vitalik, failing to give proper credit for prior art, a perception that they have poorer peer review standards than especially Bitcoin, various people, including Vitalik, supporting various perpetual income or basic income schemes or like an inflation tax. And somehow he also, I guess, claimed that that would have no effect on users or the price. Also perpetuating the idea that blockchains can be used as storage mechanisms for large amounts of data without that activity incurring higher fees or leading to massive scaling issues, and relatedly making it almost impossible for the average person to run an Ethereum full node anymore, to the point where most of the network is now relying on hosted node services like Infura. Vitalik's meeting with the Russian government and agreeing to work with a separate but related Ethereum Russia research organization, which they have stated will be independent from the Ethereum Foundation, but obviously it came with Vitalik's approval due to these meetings. Core developers making vital roadmap decisions within closed or semi-closed meetings. And a big one was their role in the ICO/token scam boom of 2017. And so that was just a summary of many of his points. We've talked about several of them and more a number of times on Block Digest over the past 150 episodes. I don't think it's a surprise that to any of our viewers that anyone here is not really a fan of Ethereum. And I will say just individually that I probably didn't have as much interest as Tuur did in Ethereum leading up to and after the launch, but I also myself had a much more optimistic view of Ethereum in 2015 and even 2016. I'm pretty sure I even used to retweet some of their development reports in 2015, but I can't precisely remember. But it didn't really take that long for me to see that a lot of these red flags that he pointed out, including some other ones, especially the the prominent role that people I'm really not a fan of at all had in the community. But regardless, if you read through Tuur's thread, there are obviously there's obviously mentions of specific prominent people like Vitalik, but none of his tweets attacking any individual in Ethereum on any personal level. But for some reason, a woman named Preethi Kassereddy, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She previously worked at both Goldman Sachs and Coinbase, but now she runs, I believe it's a tokenized forum for verifying claims or disputing claims, and I have to check the name of it. True Story, TRU Story. And so she decided to kind of make a snarky tweet in response to Tuur's thread, which, as I said, didn't personally, target anyone in particular. Let me pull it up really quick. Don't have it on my screen, but it should be somewhere here. I have to scroll through all of the spam tweets that she made about 24 hours ago where she was sharing this thread. So she responded to Tuur, the start of Tuur's thread by saying, "Hi, I'm a self-labeled Bitcoin maximalist, and my sole job consists of reading crypto Twitter / Reddit all day and then drafting tweet storms attacking non-Bitcoin people, but never really doing anything useful myself. Oh, and I own a lot of Bitcoin." And people got pretty upset about this take that she had, especially her claim that he doesn't do anything useful. When, I mean, part of the reason that his thread got so popular is because he was citing research and points that he had, curated over the years, and people found that useful. And she decided, instead of rebutting him directly, I haven't actually seen, they might have blocked each other. She might have blocked him. I assume she blocked him. But she decided to bring the thread onto her trait. When you click on it, it brings you to a page where it gives you like a chain of claims that she listed. And it gives you the option to reply to the claim, list the source. And I don't know if this is how all of the little boxes work, but she has a source, an argument, evidence, area, and then status. Like, is the claim true? I assume that's what it's for, and that has not been determined, I think, for any of them. But when you look at, like, for example, the one that I noticed in particular was the claim about Bitcoin's Lightning Network is now live and growing at a rapid clip. And the replies to that, saying that they disagreed. One of them was something like, the Lightning Network is active, but Elizabeth Stark says it's just early beta software. And it's like, I'm sorry, what does it being classified as early beta software? How does that dispute whether it's active and growing? Presumably, if it's in beta, that means it was an alpha, barely existing a year ago. That seems to be growing, in my view. But apparently that's what's hard about, it's one of the criticisms that I've had about using blockchains for journalism, is that people think, oh, blockchains are this truth machine, so if you just put it into the blockchain, that makes it true. And it's like, no, the reason the blockchain works is because there is a very specific and limited set of things that nodes are verifying in the network. And if you can't easily verify these kinds of social claims like this, because it requires, it's not something that we've built computers to understand, which is, human language, and being able to verify that. That's something that humans still do to a large degree. And I think some of the refutations that she has, or people have listed so far, are not that good. And a lot of the claims that he made, they just dismiss them as not even being worthy of refuting, because they say they're opinions, with no evidence, which I think is just like a soft way of like, okay, we're not going to address this at all.
All right,
Pretty
Chris,
upset with that. Yeah, Chris.
you
just a
beautiful
second, I have to...
British man, you say hi before I start ranting, because I'm gonna probably take a bit.
Hi, everybody. I always said that Ethereum, it's a long investment. You've got to stick with it, and I think we're going to learn who the real holders are, hodlers, in the upcoming dump in the bear market. And I think we need to get rid of the tourists. But yeah, very bullish on Ethereum long term, says an insider. What? No, that's completely right. I've always been trashing it. But look, I'm not the sort of person that likes to say I told you so. Well, that's actually a lie. I love saying I told you so. You can look at all the various videos that I've been making over the years, go back to World Crypto Network, look at what I was saying. And yeah, I think it's a scam. I don't think the world needs a Turing complete distributed computer. I think that's pretty dangerous. So what do you want me to say? I've said it all before. It's just old. Anyone watching this is going to go, yeah, I've heard all this. What's
All
new?
right. Then let me insult the ditz who is making these statements then. So a little backstory on Miss Preethi. She was a VC employee who took a 6-month JavaScript bootcamp and then started helping build systems at Coinbase. and then left to build this completely broken form that air quote fact checks. Those systems are broken and they don't work. Like, period. Like, when you have somebody fact check something, you're looking at their authority and you're weighting that to see whether or not their input matters. And the thing is, when you put the economic incentive in something like that, they're just going to tell people what they want to hear, because a bunch of people agreeing with them reinforces their authority, and then they can just say more things that'll be perceived as truth. So, like, this lady is a complete ditz. And Tuur is no angel, which is why I haven't been defending him at all. But that thread was truth.
Yeah, some harsh truth that's harsh to deal with, right? I mean, like, I kind of like you're saying, there's a financial incentive there, and like, yeah, she just took it like way over the harsh end, saying that I'm a self-proclaimed Bitcoin maximalist. I'll just say this right now: like, I put Bitcoin maximalist on my Twitter handle recently, and that wasn't like me self-proclaiming. It's because everybody says that's what I am, and I know that happens to Tuur too, where it's just like, if you have these opinions, these other people are going to say, oh, you're a maximalist. He's of the maximalist perspective. It's not like self-labeling. It's been thrown at us so much to where it's like, all right, might as well just accept it and move forward. But yeah, peer review is harsh. And, you know, especially whenever it's like digging down into technicalities of what you're trying to achieve and how you know, how exactly can that be achieved. And, you know, there's a lot of questions there with Ethereum. And I mean, like, there is a difference between, you know, 2015 and now. It's like, you know, there's really no hiding from it anymore. I mean, like, there was a bunch of attention that came towards Stop and Decrypt's Medium post whenever he wrote about how these Ethereum nodes were getting too large and you couldn't even sync up anymore. And that was a bunch of discussion within the Ethereum development community. And I saw it here on the ground where people were taking that and they were saying, they were digesting it and saying, you know, this is a problem and this is something that we should talk about. And, you know, that's just harsh realities of what you're trying to achieve here in computer science and live fire economics and game theory and the way that these blockchains work. And so, yeah, it's like the realities are in front of you. I mean, like you're saying, Janine, like with the most of the nodes being like reliant on Infura, and you know, this whole long-weighted Casper is just thrown to the side, and now it's proof of stake or bust. And you know, they've got channel states and you know, plasma and all these different things, but it's nobody knows how exactly that's going to go. And I mean, like, we've seen the problems that have escalated to this point. So it's just you know, maybe now the peer review is just like, it's just blaring. There's a problem there. And the only thing they can do is shout it down or confuse the language through, you know, trying to say a lot of this, just like creating definitions and creating their own words or using words similar. And so it's yeah, it's a different time, and it's kind of like make or break here for Ethereum in the next year or two. But you know, we'll see. I mean, maybe it will be that long-term, you know, that long-term investment.
What's that there, Chris?
Yeah, what's
What this? Oh, what's this? This is the AND thread for Ethereum. Welcome to the beginning, by one Vitalik Buterin in January 2014. And he tells us that the last 5 years have plainly demonstrated a missing feature, a sufficiently powerful Turing complete scripting language, which apparently was much needed. Is that true, strictly speaking? Is that what we were needing? And correct me if I'm wrong, Shinobi, but those op returns, all the different things you could do in Bitcoin, were they just not written in Bitcoin, or were they written and disabled? What's the story behind that?
Well, wasn't it written and then disabled because it would theoretically allow you, or no, actually allow you to just spend any coins with no signatures?
Yeah. Yeah, it's unsafe. It's unsafe at any speed. And the thing is that when you hang around in the startup space a lot, and you sort of meet all these kind of I call them self-unemployed middle class people, right? Who kind of, they're struggling to get along. They've been made redundant. Companies like Google and Facebook are automating away a lot of the decision-making processes, and now the AI industry is making a lot of headway. And probably, 5 to 10 years out, I'm just making up numbers, we'll probably be looking at a world where most of the world is run by AI. Most of the decision-making in governments and most of the decision-making within companies, to the point where you're only going to need 1 or 2 kind of supervisors within a company, and most of it will just be done probabilistically with algorithms, right? But as a result, what you now got is quite a large middle class population in the developed world, who all have expectations on living standards. They've all been, living nice lifestyles, drinking their frappuccino lattes, going out for drinks once or twice a week, and nobody likes to let go, and nobody likes to give up what they've got used to, the kind of quality of living that they've got used to. So they kind of have to hustle. They have to play the game. And part of the game is investor story time, where you go to a bunch of people that have got more money than you, and you tell them a story about how you're going to make the numbers in their bank account go up. And you kind of have to get them along. And a lot of the time, if you don't have any skills, if you're not actually a developer, one of the things that you can do is you can just start coming up with solutions to problems that don't exist. And you can come out with a lot of science, and you can sort of bamboozle people with a lot of technical terms. And you can point to things like the Gartner hype cycle, for example. If you look at Gartner, Gartner, it's a consultancy firm, and they every year, every August or so, they publish a graph with all the upcoming trends, all the new emerging technologies. And it doesn't just show the ones that are coming up, it shows the ones that have come and gone. It shows the sort of the peak of expectation, the trough of disillusionment. And for the seasoned serial entrepreneur or the self-unemployed, what you're looking for is stuff that's going up and to the right, that's just reaching the peak of that expectation. And what you want to do is you want to jump onto that meme. You want to jump on that trend, you want to ride it up to the top, and then you want to get your exit. And one of the interesting things that happens within startup culture is that you end up with the greater fool, which is you get a bunch of investors to buy into your scam, and then they become part of your scam as they slowly come to the realization that there's nothing really going on under the hood, that it's really all just window dressing in Potomkin. And then they need to go sell it off to another group of people. And that's kind of what's happened with Ethereum. Vitalik was actually a bit of a hero in the industry. I don't know if anybody remembers, but he was a bit of a legend. He was writing for Bitcoin magazine. He was one of the first people to start charging for his content in Bitcoins. And he would do this wonderful thing where, he would release half the article and then say, well, in order to get the other half, you have to pay me 5 Bitcoins or whatever it was back then. And I really like that. I like anybody who demonstrates that there's actually a third way of acquiring Bitcoin, not just mining and buying, but also just earning. And I've really been promoting that. So I really liked Vitalik, but unfortunately, the temptations were there. The temptation was, look, isn't this frenzy going crazy? Lots of people are throwing money. They're not really thinking it through. And they'll throw money at anything. And if you kind of can talk, if you're very good with words and you can get up and you can present, it doesn't matter whether there's anything really going on at the back end of your business. You can basically get a bunch of people to buy in. They'll slowly realize that the whole thing is a scam. And then they'll go, shit, now we need to find even greater fools that we can sell it onto. And really, at the end of the day, it was a solution looking for a problem. We never really needed this. Rant done.
You wanted to pitch something in, Janine?
Yeah, so Greg Maxwell was the last person that Tuur quoted in his thread, and it said the same thing in different words. He said, I think this was 2016, yeah. All of these radical improvements in scalability, privacy, and flexibility show up when you realize that Turing complete is the wrong tool, that what our systems do is verification, not computation. This cognitive error confers no advantage outside of marketing to people with a fuzzy idea of what smart contracts might be good for in the first place. More powerful smart contracting in the world of Bitcoin will absolutely be a thing. I don't doubt it. But the market marketing blather around Ethereum isn't power, it's a boat anchor, a vector for consensus and consistency and decentralization, destroying resource exhaustion and incentive mismatches. Fortunately, the cognitive framework I've described here is well understood in the community of Bitcoin experts.
Mm-hmm. It's not about computing, it's about validating computing.
Yes, sir. So yeah, what else is going on, man? We got some wallet issues to get into, huh?
Yeah, so these, honestly, this is from the brain fart,
35C.
the Chaos Computer Club's Hackers Congress.
Yes.
But honestly, I think that pretty much all of these exploits have been wildly overblown. So they covered some exploits for the Ledger Nano S, the Ledger Blue, and then the Trezor. So I'll just dive into the two Nano S exploits first. The first one that they covered was actually just a supply chain attack. And so honestly, like this isn't really that big of a deal because at this point, like if you've compromised the supply chain, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Like everything is open game. And this exploit is kind of really not that practical. So what they did was intercepted the Nano, inserted some additional hardware on it to allow the confirmation button to be triggered electronically by a radio frequency. And then the idea of it was to have malware on the victim's computer that would craft a malicious transaction and be able to trigger the ledger to confirm the transaction for signing by waiting nearby with a radio device. And honestly, like the level of effort that would have to go into this is just so absurd that at this point, like you would just be better off having a completely fabricated device that would just have a broken random number generator or something, where it would generate a seed that you could brute force or had a table of and swept the second it had a balance. But one thing I will say though with this attack is it's could theoretically be possible to trigger the radio device in a modified ledger without actually waiting in the next room or something with a radio device. You could potentially modify firmware through an exploit on like a GPU or some other device in the computer that would actually be able to generate radio waves powerful enough to be picked up by something very near the computer and therefore like trigger the confirmation button with malware on the actual computer that crafted the transaction. So it's not something you necessarily need to literally be like waiting in the next room to trigger. You could theoretically do this remotely, but it's still just kind of a not really practical thing in my mind. You know, like I said, you just give them a fake device where it's a seed that you're aware of and can just sweep when they load it.
Yeah, so the one I watched about half of it. I didn't see the second half, but even the first half of the presentation was expecting more. It wasn't as mind-blowing as I was expecting considering the title. One of the things I didn't like was that in the introduction they were kind of just giving a brief description of like what is cryptocurrency and what are seeds and all of that. And they actually recommended seeds, kind of put me off. It's like, okay, don't do that. It is even in the Bitcoin wiki as being not a good idea, so don't recommend it anymore. You can do it. Like if you're super confident in your ability to manage that and risk the data loss that comes with that practice, then that's fine. Don't recommend it to the average. The other thing, I think the only thing that really interested me was I think it was one of the first exploits they showed where they added like a malicious chip or something into, I think it was the Ledger device, and I think it was able to bypass the firmware verification step, have the interface open. It has you like check to make sure that the firmware is the same firmware that they sent you, and I think it didn't. It for some reason it recognized that there was like a problem on Linux, but when he switched to a Windows machine, then it was able to bypass that verification. I can't. Do you, Shinobi? Do you remember what that was? I just thought I remembered it was funny because it didn't work on Linux, but it worked on Windows.
I think that was the next one. I don't recall that involving like actually installing hardware on it, but I think what they did is there's like a constant value in a memory sector that's protected in the ledger for the firmware verification and for the update process. It would
Yeah.
wipe that section of the memory, then it would load the new firmware, and it would only replace that value in the memory if the firmware signature checked out. And they found out that another section of the memory was mapped to that protected section. So you could write it somewhere else and it would physically put it in the appropriate memory sector. But they were not able to actually take that because that was on the MCU, not the actual secure element, and I don't think that they were actually able to get a usable exploit that would get access to keys out of that. I think the closest they were able to do was load malicious firmware that would run, and then on the next boot would like it would replace it with the legitimate firmware. But I don't think they actually like accomplished a key extraction exploit with it at this time.
Yeah, because I definitely want to preface with this that, like, I mean, it's pretty much all of the major vulnerabilities, especially with the Trezor that have been found that have needed to be fixed, have all been vulnerabilities where you need physical access to the device. So the fact that this vulnerability requires physical access to the device and extensive physical access to the device, that's not only it's not surprising, but it fits the general pattern that's the main that's the main attack vector in terms like the vulnerabilities where you can do like remote attacks are few and far between, and really that's what these hardware wallets are best at. They're good at, you know, preventing remote access vulnerabilities that can happen with the device. Whereas physical access, that's a lot harder to protect against, especially, you know, I mean, you have open hardware, but like if it's easy to open it and tinker around with it, you know, the consequence of that is like physical access can tinker around with it. But the benefit is that if they provide you that, you know, just the board looks as it should be or whatever, then you should be able to at least be able to open the device yourself and see, okay, has this device been tampered with? And you can't, you probably, most people don't have the expertise to fully verify that, but at least you are able to open it and make sure that there hasn't been any suspicious anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And then the like Ledger Blue attack is honestly like the most impractical out of all of them, I think. Like pretty much what they did is when you have because it's pretty much like a small device with a built-in touch screen, and when you go to touch the screen to input the pin, it actually has like the light up, the depress animation and things, and that creates electrical activity in the screen that pretty much can get picked up by the USB cable and broadcast for a small distance. And so what they did was just keep pressing the key or the individual numbers over and over and over again and use an AI learning algorithm to get a signature for each key press to be able to use a radio detector, excuse me, to identify which button was pressed. and therefore they'd be able to kind of eavesdrop and figure out the pin. But the thing is, like, you would not only have to be at a very close distance to pick this up, but there are a lot of different variables involved, like the position of the device, the angle and contortion of the USB antenna, and all of these different things are going to change the signal that you would pick up. And so I think the practicality of this is just not something that could actually be exploited in the real world at all. And honestly, it's a pretty trivial thing to fix. Just getting rid of the screen activity when you press a button and potentially randomizing the order of the pins.
Yeah, and the other part that kind of put me off just in terms of how they handled it is that, I mean, they claim that they notified Ledger about the vulnerabilities or these particular vulnerabilities. I think they said something like 168 days ago, which what that would be, 4 months, something like that, 4 months ago. So they say that they notified Ledger. They did not say that they've notified Trezor, and actually, Pavel mentioned, or Stick, goes by Stick, he tweeted that they had not been notified of the vulnerabilities, and so they hadn't, they hadn't put forward a response. They were reacting to it 'cause I think he was actually there at the conference, so it was the first time they were hearing about it. It sounds like in terms of Trezor that things ended up going okay though, because I guess he reached out to them directly at the conference and they talked about it, and they'll be fixing that, the vulnerabilities, or trying to find ways to make this less of a big deal in January. So I guess on Trezor's end it went okay. I don't know about Ledger, if it's true that they notified them. I mean, that's kind of expected. If a lot of companies, when they receive these reports, it's catch and, or it's very hit and miss in terms of whether they actually evaluate them as being serious or whatever, and how they respond. So I don't know about that, but yeah, I'm generally not favor of people who are like, oh, we found a vulnerability and we're going to make a bunch of press about it by talking about it at a conference, and not even trying to reach out to one or possibly both, if they're not telling the truth about that, companies about the findings. Because pretty much, I mean, most of the talks I see at CCC, they preface either at the end or beginning of their presentation that they've made the affected parties aware, and that a lot of times they will say, like, these have already been patched, like they're not live vulnerabilities anymore. We just want to present our research and how we found them, and maybe this might be a problem in other systems that are similar. But pretty much a lot of people at CCC always make an effort to reach out to the companies involved, and I guess that kind of happened or didn't really happen in this case, and that's always a bit disappointing.
Mm-hmm. So Chris still AWOL, or can he jump in on the Ledger Blue before we move along?
Yeah, he's AWOL at the moment.
Well, I mean, like, maybe come in on this. I was just going to comment on this, like how, security is like something that's very hard to get the right level of what is ease of access and still secure from an attacker. And, it's really hard to actually get that right. And, I mean, like, we could develop the most, top secret, top of the line bunker, and there's going to be some, specialist group that could figure out a way to get inside that bunker or a way to compromise it. And it's very hard to, have that touch where it's just like, enough security to where an attacker can't feasibly get into your wallet and take your Bitcoin and still give you the ease of use of using the wallet. And that's really hard to achieve. And so I could understand how some of these things where it's like, the supply chain hack ones in particular, like that's just an obvious, like, if, way back when Trezor was first coming out, I remember it was still back then, they were saying, do not buy it off Amazon. Do not buy it off Amazon, because you don't know what exactly has happened to that chip. And so, I mean, way back then it was order it through Satoshi Labs. I mean, there's even your own steps in the process, you know, that can affect your security. I mean, if you are very lax on the understandings of this and you don't really look and investigate it that well and you just buy one off of Amazon, then guess what? There's probably a supply chain hack there in the middle to where your hardware wallet is not going to be as secure as you'd like it to be. And yeah, there's always specialists that are going to really dig into what you built and try and crack a way through it. And that's just, it's really hard to keep, you know, that security at the right level to where people have access and it's on their decision, and attacker can't get into it. It's very hard to achieve that, and I think they've done a very good job about it so far.
All right, Chris, you had something to say on the blue and the radio analysis?
Yeah, I think you have to be quite a high value target in order for that to be viable. But speaking more generally, I wouldn't trust any of these hardware wallet companies. I wouldn't. I mean, I think that you really all you can do is try to estimate what kind of value you are to a potential adversary, and then estimate how much you're willing to spend in terms of time, money, and energy in protecting your assets. Because there are trade-offs. Janine mentioned whether it's opened, whether it's kind of open design, whether you can take it apart, see what's inside. There's a trade-off there about whether or not you want openness as a company that's producing this kind of hardware security so that your customers can know that you are being faithful and sincere. And then there's a trade-off with, but if it's too open, then also an adversary can see it. And that's a concept known as the enemy knows the system. It's one of Shannon's maxims. And the problem is that for a lot of people, there's too much of an educational hurdle for them to get over for setting up some kind of paper walleting system or some kind of air-gapped laptop, which at the moment still is the most secure way to store your crypto assets that I can think of, unless you've got Janine's kind of covering her face, we're in the same room together. So say what you think.
I mean, I would disagree on the point that using just a regular laptop is a better option for the average person, because the average person's laptop is much more likely to be insecure, containing malware, things like that, than one of these hardware devices if they buy it directly from the vendor. Like as Rick says, the attack surface of any laptop or smartphone device is much like there's kind of a scale of things. The attack surface of a laptop is bigger than a smartphone, and the attack surface of a smartphone is bigger than a hardware device. So in general, the hardware, like for significant amounts, I don't know what, it depends on how you would scale that up in terms of what amount it's worth for buying a hardware wallet. But at a significant amount of money, you should be using a hardware wallet, because the trade-off you make in terms of using instead a laptop that is much more likely to have problems with it, is much more likely to have software that you can't verify, software that you don't know how exactly it's running. It's much higher than if you use a hardware wallet. Most of this presentation in particular was about supply chain tax, and I do think that hardware wallet companies should do much more in that area in terms of, like, one of the things they criticized at the beginning of the presentation was the fact that they use these security stickers, and that's it. In general, that's just, it doesn't really actually help anything, because I understand the consequences of using the stick and the pitfalls and what that doesn't actually prove. So
Yeah, so I agree pretty much with everything that Janine just said. So like I said, there's a large barrier, educational barrier, which means that you can't just pick any laptop. So when I said air-gapped device, I didn't specify which type of device. And it's quite right to say that the security hasn't actually been taken seriously in the tech industry since the beginning, and it was never considered a priority. And it's only now that we have these digital scarce assets that suddenly we're scrambling and saying actually that the attack surface is much wider than we thought, and we've got all these really weird supply chains issues that actually come from global economics, like the fact that China pretty much manufactures and controls most of the integrated circuits on the planet. And as a result, there are lots of issues with centralization, and as a consumer, you have no idea what you're buying or where it really came from. So that's absolutely right. And when I say paper walleting, I don't necessarily literally mean paper. I mean actually steel, laser etching, any of these kinds of concepts are also equally valid. But at the moment, people are not designing, we don't really have the right tooling for this kind of technology right now to be able to produce a secret in an environment that's truly private. Most of the devices in our world have network adapters plugged into them, or they have some kind of Bluetooth, or they have some radii which allows them to be vulnerable within a certain radius, that they are vulnerable to snooping devices. What we haven't really built is like an old-fashioned Babbage machine, perhaps something that's a bit more compact, where I can actually pull a few levers and produce a set of keys without actually having any electricity involved whatsoever. We haven't really got that kind of tooling, for example. But that is the level that you're going to have to go to if you want to be, super paranoid about it all. So in short, back to my original point, I wouldn't trust any of these companies. The first problem that they have to solve is really the supply chain issue. They need to do provenance. They need to be able to some degree, give you assurances, and you'll never get guarantees. It'll never be 100%. There's no such thing as perfect security, okay? But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And whilst they're off building lovely features, like, you've got this distributed trading stuff, you've got the shapeshift integration into Trezor, you've got all these lovely sort of furnishings and this gold plating that's going on in these hardware wallets, but no one's really thinking root and branch. The weakest link in all of this chain, after you've got all of these lovely features, the weakest link is the supply chain. If you can't even solve that problem, which is a hard problem to solve, you can't give some kind of meaningful assurance to the customer, not a guarantee, but a meaningful assurance, that this is the device that we sent you. This is the basis upon which you made the purchase. The reason you buy a ledger is because you are outsourcing the trust to people in your network, you're reading reviews online, and you're making a decision, okay, this is the hardware company that I trust not to have backdoored the device. That's the one job that they've got to do for you, is to sell you a safe. They're not selling you absolute security. They're selling you a safe, something you would have in your house that's going to provide a barrier to any thief or anybody, any hacker, where they're going to have to overcome some serious hurdles. So the idea is that unless you are a high value target, most hackers, thieves, whoever your adversary is, are going to pick easier targets, right? But if they throw away the reward model, if they don't care about that reward, and they just go, right, I am on principle just going to target this user, then nobody can really help you. But I think that the one thing that these companies are not doing right now, that their priorities are back to front. They're private companies, so of course their legal obligation is to maximize shareholder profit. That means that there's a lot of short-term decision making around the marketing, overselling themselves, selling themselves as these really secure companies, when actually what you're dealing with is a knowledge base around hardware security that's so recondite and so difficult to understand that they can pretty much say whatever they want in the public in their marketing, and it's very hard to hold them accountable. And I would like to pay tribute to Salim Rashid. He's brilliant. He's pretty much hacked all these devices now. He gets them, he takes them apart, he writes up reports on them. Good on him. He's a young guy, and that gets said about him too many times, but he is a young man. And I think what he's done is wonderful, because what he's done is, as a hardware specialist, as a kind of a researcher, right, a security researcher, he's spotted an opportunity for himself. He saw these companies coming, he saw the marketing, he saw that there were these consumers who had a great need, and that need was for security. I need to secure my crypto assets. He also saw that those consumers didn't have a lot of insight, they didn't have knowledge, and the marketing and all of the incentives that come from running a private company were geared towards overselling the product, oversell the products, get more consumers to buy your products because you need to show growth to investors so they can get the next round of investors on. And he pulled them all apart. And he said, this is bullshit. Your device isn't secure. It's just like, it's an Android. I can get Pong working on this, Snake, whatever. And that's beautiful. It wasn't just him, actually. There was a number of them, particularly in the BitFi saga. BitFi was one of these companies. They're probably the worst of all of them in terms of the marketing literature and the way that they dealt with it. And I think, people like that, those are the real entrepreneurs, in my opinion. People like that the entrepreneurs of today, the ones that I love the most, are not the ones working for startups. It's the ones holding the startups accountable for their bullshit. It's the people like in their bedrooms or wherever you are. It doesn't matter where you are. The point is that you are self-motivated, centrifugal. It's autopoetic. You're just passionate and you care, and you're just one of these people that will just bring down a lot of these companies. Those are the entrepreneurs of today, the ones that I really love, the enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Alrighty. And so I'm going to say one word before we get to the last vulnerability that's going to scare everybody to death. Tempest. Go Google Tempest. All right. But the last vulnerability disclosed was for the Trezor 1. And though I don't believe they tested it on the Model T, they seemed pretty confident that it would also work on that. But pretty much the quick gist of it was the Trezor actually doesn't use a secure element, unlike the Ledger. And so everything is kind of managed in the flash of the MCU, except it's bit protected so that access to the memory is not allowed. And there's 3 different levels where no access is allowed, unauthorized, full access is given, and then in the middle there, some access to things like the RAM, the debugging, and so on. And so what they did is pretty much glitch the device to reset that bit field so that they were able to access the RAM. And one of the things they did say in going over this is that especially considering it doesn't use a secure element, that the design on firmware checking was very solid. Like they were unable to actually, get something malicious on there. But what they were able to do after successfully glitching the device, which I think took them almost 3 months with 3 different people trying it all over the world, was initiate the firmware update process after they gained the ability to read and dump the contents of the RAM. And what the Trezor does while going through the firmware update process is it takes your seed and moves it into the RAM. And then it would go through the firmware update, check the validity, and if it's invalid, it would delete everything from RAM. And if it was valid, it would reload everything in the flash memory before, clearing the RAM and finalizing the process. And they stopped the process after it had dumped the seed into the RAM and were able to actually dump the contents out there. And so this is by no means like something super trivial to pull off before they actually put the whole process together for people to replicate. And it requires actual control of the device. So unless somebody breaks in and steals your device, like there is no worry whatsoever about remote exploitation of this. But Trezor is going to be looking at how to address this. And if you use passphrases to actually generate your addresses, then this really isn't any threat unless they gain access to your passphrase as well, because that's never actually stored permanently in the device.
Yeah, man, that was a big one. I heard a lot of people yelling about in the mumble and on Twitter was this Electrum attack, and I mean, yeah, it's one of those like just classic man in the middle, just trying to get you to. I guess I mean, like I'm still kind of like I need to read up on it, but I mean, I've heard a lot of buzz about it as far as people just you know I mean, people trying to say like, "Oh, this guy's doing it or that guy's doing it," and this is just like another, going on from that last story. I mean, security is something where, I mean, you can definitely be the weakest link in the chain. Where if you're not, paying attention to everything, it's you can just give up all your security, and that's where it's really difficult. It is really difficult to stay secure in this environment. So I imagine, these things, they'll continue to crop up and they'll always probably be around. People trying to find ways to steal your coins.
Yep. And, compromising hardware isn't the only way to do that. Next story up, a huge Electrum phishing attack that got somewhere around 245 Bitcoins. And ultimately, this is really the result of pretty much just an architectural flaw in Electrum. And so, not Electrum itself, but the protocol that it uses to communicate with Electrum servers. And so, after you relay a transaction to an Electrum server, the server is capable of sending you an arbitrary warning message. And I think the logic here was kind of just, something wrong with the server, like things of that nature. But somebody spun up a bunch of fake Electrum servers and used this error message functionality, pretty much pretending to be an Electrum security update and linking people to a malicious binary. And everybody who got this message and downloaded this had all of their coins swept. And yeah, this just kind of goes to show the importance of actually verifying the source of software you're using. And honestly, this is a bit of a fuck up in the whole protocol of the client communicating with the server. Like, a server should not be allowed to just send arbitrary messages. It should, be stuck to, here is an error message. It will display a static thing to the user, and that's it. And I do believe that they've kind of removed this in the last update, although I haven't had a chance to really check that out. But, it's the exact same thing as using hardware. Like, any software you use to manage private keys, you should not just be downloading willy-nilly. You should be ensuring it's something that has a lot of public attention and people looking at it, and you need to actually take steps to verify that it came from a legitimate source. Like, I cannot think of any serious wallet software I would use that doesn't either have distribution keys for you to check signatures and a binary hash against, or some other kind of authenticated distribution mechanism. And if somebody is trying to get you to download software that doesn't have that, you should not be using it.
Yeah, this is the classic man in the middle I was actually talking about. Excuse me. I don't know why I thought that we had already jumped into the story, but there's just been a lot of this, people talking about ways to get into your coin supply there and trying to compromise your security. And yeah, you always have to, that's what Chris was just saying there. It's just it's really hard to stay secure and to have the knowledge required to know all the little missteps that you could fall into. And certainly somebody just stepping in there with a message is something that you've become accustomed to, and next thing you know, you've been compromised. And so always mind your P's and Q's, even when you think you're in the most secure environment.
I hope everyone watching this understands that this is an adversarial system. This isn't legacy banking, which is also technically an adversarial system, but that's covered up for you by the insurance industry and governments who will bail you out to some tune. All right, so the first £100,000 or whatever the regulation says are protected. FDIC, I think, is the acronym I've heard from the US, FDIC insured and so on. But this is just a financial vehicle. This is a product that insurers and actuaries have examined, and they've looked at the base risks, and they've examined all the various different threat models, because risk is a distributed phenomena. Okay, so it requires planning. It requires a lot of upfront investment for them to really plan around what happens in the case of an emergency. So you get some protection from there. But the problem is the world is a very volatile place. And in the developed world, we feel very safe. And when we walk outside, we feel safe to be able to go about our daily tasks. But really, that's just an illusion. There are other things that are really going on in the world that are making you feel that safe. Your governments, if you're living in the developed country and you're watching this, they've got their fingers on the scales just ever so slightly, just tilted in your favor. so that the odds kind of go like a casino. The odds favor you just ever so slightly. But the house edge doesn't have to be great. But over time, if you have a slight favor, like a 0.5% or a 1% favor on every bet, over time that pays huge rewards. But with Bitcoin, you really are exposed. It's you versus the universe, and you're going to have a lot of actors out there who don't have your interests at heart and will actually use you as a way to get themselves ahead. And so you have to take full responsibility. It's a very Darwinian process, this.
Yeah, I wish a lot more people put, a lot of thought into the game theory behind Bitcoin and the space in general, and the way that, it is an adversarial space, and just the large amount of ways that you could become attacked and compromised. And I mean, like, yeah, it definitely is like a false sense of security when you compare the traditional world to this world. And that sense of security has been going on for a long enough time to where even when you start to become aware of it, you still haven't even thought about all the possible ways that it could come your way.
Mm-hmm. All right. And speaking of Darwinian nature of things, though, there's been some rumors circulating around the Chinese media that Jihan Wu and Zhan were going to be stepping down as co-CEOs of Bitmain. And when reached out to for comments, there was pretty much no official response or comment from Bitmain. So, given the rumors of a potential 50% of the workforce being laid off, all of the trouble going on with the IPO, if this is an accurate rumor and McCree and Jihan end up stepping down as CEOs, I see some very bad news coming for both Bcash, Litecoin, and pretty much anybody else who is on a network that Bitmain has a sizable holding of. Because if they really are restructuring to the point of pulling out both CEOs, I almost guarantee that their crypto holdings are going to be liquidated. Because, I mean, there's really nothing else for them to do. Like, the hardware stockpiles they have are obsolete. They're running out of cash, or they wouldn't be going through a restructuring like this. And it's just these mountains of shit coins that they're sitting on that any new head would not have any kind of irrational or emotional attachment to.
Hey, man, I mean, that popcorn's been going for so long, man. I think it's stale at this point, and we're just kind of like waiting for the realities to set in. I mean, like, we did that story last episode about over 50%, and I think that since that last episode, we've seen kind of went all the way to 85%. 85% of the staff and co-CEOs stepping down. There's some major restructuring going on there, and at this point, I feel like they're going to be lucky to make it out of it alive, man. It really is. It's been a probably a long, slow bleed for Jihan and Bitmain more than anybody else in this space for the past year. Gotta hurt.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think I'm going to just hop along, though. We got just really 3 short stories left to get through, and then we can spend some time shooting the shit. But next up, another popcorn moment. So back in April, Craig Wright filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit against him by the Kleinman estate for shutting down the company they had illegally, seizing the intellectual property of that company, and air quote, running away with over 1 million Bitcoins that probably don't exist. Well, a federal court judge has decided to dismiss Craig's motion to get rid of the suit. He's going to have to sit through this. So he has supported the dismissal of the intellectual property claims because the statute of limitations in Florida has been exceeded in that case. But He does think that there is merit to the Kleinman estate's claims of entitlements to at least 300,000 of these Bitcoin that don't exist, as well as any derivative forked assets connected to them since the forking madness from the creation of Bcash last year. And so, no later than January 10th next year, Craig is going to have to respond to these counts. And this is going to court.
That's major popcorn.
So I just have one question for you guys. Do you think he's going to finally admit that he's not Satoshi and just try to cry he was lying in court? Or do you think he's going to try and keep the bluff going and say that Kleinman's estate has no claim to these imaginary Bitcoin?
I'm going to guess the bluff. He's going to keep going.
Yeah, he'll double down on it. He'll martingale that shit all the way down.
Countersuit.
Well, all I know is that next year is going to be lots of popcorn. And next up is another lawsuit blurb. So Mark Karpeles actually sat through a day in court regarding the embezzlement charges relating to Mt. Gox and has pled not guilty. So I guess we'll get to see in this case how he explains moving around 340 million yen from a Mt. Gox account to his personal account and then used it to invest in software companies. So let's give a little round of applause for the sad man who gave us our first bull run. Or not first bull run, first globally notable bull run. And then
all right.
And then last up, Jordan Peterson has started accepting Bitcoin donations. And as of right now, he has actually got sitting in his address 0.89 BTC from 137 transactions. And so, like we've talked about, I think, for the last 2 episodes, all of this nonsense going on with MasterCard and Patreon and Professor Peterson, as well as Dave Rubin, somebody who has a news show on YouTube looking to create a Patreon competitor. I think it's going to be very interesting to see really how far down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, as a lot of people have been putting it, that Professor Peterson decides to go. Because, I mean, there is really nothing like just having Bitcoin sent to you to show how painless and simple it really is to onboard into this system. And he has a lot of eyes on him that he could start directing towards Bitcoin as far as a mechanism to deal with what seems to be blowing up into rampant financial censorship based on political ideology.
Yeah, and I just wanted to tack on to that whole discussion about Patreon and this whole possibility of trying to get Bitcoin in the hands of these guys is because I've seen some discussion of like, why is this so important or pertinent, and I've been reading through it and thinking about it, and I mean, like, for sure it's not just like, yeah, this guy's got a bunch of eyes on him. It's the fact that this guy has gone up against the Canadian government in a free speech discussion about preferred pronouns. And that's really what got him his whole, like, well, I mean, he went on to Joe Rogan and then kind of spoke about it. And then it became this big discussion. And, so he's already kind of central to this discussion about, free speech and like, the way that's, kind of pushed into these, like, oh, you can't say this, you can say this, how that's tyrannical on these ideas, the battle of ideas. And, in this whole discussion, I think, when we talk about, free speech and, the right to basically the right to banking and, right to privacy and all these sort of things that Bitcoin is trying to help enable is due process also is like, because this whole thing with Sargon of Akkad and everything was just like, and even with the, you know, the info wars, like, oh, it's all blame on Sandy Hook or something. There's still no like due process or like a process where we understand it's all subjective. And, you know, that's just where, you know, yeah, if we could get, you know, I know that there is like a possible Bitcoin platform out there that does that tries to take over try to build on Patreon's model. I think it's called Bitbacker. I'm not sure. I need to look that up. But I mean, like, we really need to just have something that's a good user interface, a good user experience, because I mean, if we could get the attention of these people that are already grab the attention of Jordan Peterson for what is, you know, we're talking about free speech, and like, you know, they can kind of make the connection now that, oh, you know, there's this payment processing layer that weren't really that aware of. And so if, you know, if we could get those guys onboarded to where their fans have a way to, you know, hand them over donations and they know that they're not going to be censored, I think that would be a huge, like, not just like an onboarding event, but like people that are onboarded and understand that whole Bitcoin is freedom meme before the idea of like Bitcoin's going to make me money meme and everything. So, yeah, I know that I've seen a lot of people like, why is this so important? It's like, well, it's kind of just like this guy's got a nexus of discussion points of like why, you know, between tyranny and liberty already, as far as like, you know, rights that were afforded in Western countries and how they're being degraded. And so, you know, whenever these people see an answer, when they're already aware of the problem, that could be huge in the people that are onboarded and the way that they see the network.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's really like, you know, I've been screaming this for like maybe the last year or so. Like, this group of people on the internet are what Bitcoiners need to be reaching out to, because that is the wider population outside of our bubble that will actually have utility for Bitcoin. Like, and it's what it's actually for. And like, it seems like we don't need to, like, they're slowly falling in towards us just because of all of this shit with MasterCard and PayPal and Patreon.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up real quick. What was that Bitcoin alternative? Do you know if it's Bitbacker? I'm just looking that up real quick.
I forget, but I think so, but I'm not going to trust my memory on that right now.
Well, either way, I think that, yeah, that's something that's worthy of grabbing the community's attention and, you know, kind of creating the buzz around it. I mean, like, I've seen it bleed over into, you know, like what Chris was saying, if you see the top of the charts, like what's buzzy, like all of those blockchain guys now are like, oh, you know, subscription services, recurring payments, like, you know, this is it now. And so it's created a lot of buzz, and it's got a lot of people looking at different models, and hopefully, you know, that'll kind of rally the community around trying to find the best solution while, you know, it's still kind of very prevalent that this is a problem.
I have a few things. I'm listening to everything you're saying very closely. I think all of that stuff is great. I would love to see a Patreon competitor that is Bitcoin based. I would like to see it quite soon. I'd like to see some Lightning action going on there as well. But there are some cautions that we need to air. And one of them is that once you start getting a controversial group of people using a censorship resistant payment mechanism like Bitcoin, the incentive, the honeypot incentive for governments and anybody who has something in it for these people is to start mining and harvesting that data. So every time you engage in a transaction on the internet, you are leaving a trail of personal identifiable information, digital exhaust, if you will. As you go around the internet, you're giving out your MAC ID address to your local router, you're giving out obviously your IP address, and you're giving out fingerprint data from your browser, all this kind of stuff. And at the moment, the entire business model, the lie that we tell ourselves for the economy of the internet, is that it's your identity that we're really harvesting. That's how advertising works. And so whilst we go through this emperor has no clothes, I think we're at the stage now where the kid has screamed at the top of his lungs and told everyone that the emperor is naked. But the adults are only slowly starting to wake up one by one. Okay, it's going to take a little while for advertising to die as an industry, because too many lifestyles depend on it. Too many people actually get something from it existing. And I think that if Jordan Peterson, someone of his kind of stature and his following, start to get into crypto, just be aware that the people that are going to start using it as noobs are not going to know how to use proper counter surveillance measures. And you are going to get a large honeypot of personal identifiable information. Anyone who goes off and makes that Patreon is going to have a huge responsibility to not persist data, to minimize logging on their computer, and then which territory are they going to host that in? And if you get somebody, if you're in Russia and you're hosting content and you're Russia officially, there are no gay people in Russia, right? Not officially. But if you're making statements about that and you're in Russia and the Russian government starts to come down on you, then you're going to have issues there, just as one example. There are many other that we can probably brainstorm and come to think of, but you get the point. And so I think that we do have to be cautious in our support of this new wave of adoption. I think personally, my preference would be to get rid of 80–90% of the speculation out of this industry. The speculators just need to go. The main use case of Bitcoin right now, and has been, is just speculation. It's gambling. It's just an online gambling. If you play one of these online games, the ones where they give you currency in game, like what you learn when you use that, then you start to see, oh wait, this isn't too dissimilar to Bitcoin and trading, and how you get locked into a currency you can't get out of, but then you're given all these avenues for spending, but then all of those are basically gaming and gambling based. You kind of notice that it's not that dissimilar. And I think there is obviously speculation is important to any economy and arbitrage, but this is finance. And so you really have to I think you have to get rid of all the excess speculation, and you have to start getting intrinsic motivators for why people would want this. And this Jordan Peterson thing, if this is just the beginning, I think it's great. I'm not making any statements for or against Jordan Peterson myself personally, but I think that this kind of thing could really get traction. And now you have a reason to hold the asset that isn't purely speculative. And I think that's really important for crypto. Bitcoin really needs that. It needs a circular economy internally. So we talked about BISC. We've got Adam here from Wasabi. Wasabi will play a role here too, okay, for these people. That process needs to be, in my opinion, and I've said this all along, is it needs to be in your browser. There needs to be an integrated walleting system that goes all the way from cold through to your hot wallet. And it's not just about managing your keys, it's about helping you manage your finances. What level of risk are you willing to take? Here's your savings account, here is your checking account, here is your current account that you use every day. And how are you provisioning those funds? And what is the software that you're going to use that's going to help you segregate your money so that you've got some money on a hardware wallet, some money in a safe somewhere in a steel wallet, and then you've got your browser extension. And why isn't Wasabi or CoinJoin in any case just built into that whole system so that you don't even have to think about it automatically every single, when you earn, I think when you earn your money, that's fair game for identity purposes, right? Yeah, you should have to say, okay, I got my money from here, and I'm eligible whenever you're part of any group, right? But when you spend your money, I see no fucking good reason why anyone needs to know what you're spending your money on, especially if it's small amounts, especially if it's for content on the internet. But the reason why Patreon and these companies are having problems is because they deal with such a large volume, and it's so politically sensitive what they're doing, that their investors just said, look, just comply, just over comply, do more than what you have to comply with the regulation, and shut down anything that is remotely risky.
You know what I think could solve that, Chris?
Yeah.
Xiaomi and eCash servers. You just
but you're not.
in.
That's a different layer of protection. I'm talking at a social layer. Like, we could have a whole conversation about why governments should exist, but the point is that they do exist and they're not going away. So the question is, what do you do with them whilst we're stuck with them?
No, that's my point. Is like, if you have a Bitcoin-based like Patreon platform, I put X amount of Bitcoin onto it, and I get a bunch of Chalmian tokens that are blinded, and then I just give them to content creators, and they can go collect their revenue. But
Oh, I see.
nobody has any clue who paid them, just that it was paid through this system.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But it was your mention of a Chaumian CoinJoin server that got no par. So Chaumian eCash server, yeah, that got no par. So excited about those CoinJoins. So maybe somebody will hear that and say like, oh yeah, that's interesting, and they'll start building that out.
Take those old ideas and put them to some use.
Right on.
So what do we want to have be the last topic of the season and of the year?
I don't know.
Final thoughts, New Year's resolutions. What was your favorite moments of the year as far as like a top 3 of things that you got excited about?
No, let's do predictions. That's what everyone does. Let's do some listicles. Your top 10 tips for crypto in 2019, or something really crass like that. Where's the clickbaity headlines? I can't believe I left. You're in charge of this thing. Look what you've done with it. I need to see more clickbait. I need to see deeply ironic clickbait from this show more often, please. Let's do some crass predictions because they're really easy. Do price predictions. We could do all sorts, or we could just shoot the shit, which is actually my favorite thing to do.
I'm gonna say the most salacious headline that'll break while we're on our break will be something about backed getting backed again. I'm gonna predict that. I mean, even though we've already heard a little bit about it, that's kind of an easy prediction.
Bitmain will go bankrupt while we're on break.
Actually, that's a pretty good prediction. I like that one. Well, so what's Zhan going to do? Like, is he got plans? What's he going to move into?
Well, if these rumors are true, he's not going to be CEO of Bitmain anymore.
Yeah, but surely he's not going to disappear, is he, from the industry? He's going to do something else, presumably.
I think he would. He's made a complete ass of himself for like the last year and a half.
I imagine he's going to work himself into something with that ABC client or something with the Chinese government, and trying to just build out a crypto for them or something. I mean, yeah, I don't know if he'll actually just leave the space tail between the legs. I'm sure he'll still probably be around.
Yeah, I expect he will. I mean, he's still a player, and you talk about like he's made an ass out of himself. Well, so is Zuko, but he's still around. People still take him seriously. There are people who take him seriously. So you can stick around.
Competitor.
I expect so. The guy has too much ambition. He cares too much to just fade away.
So someone in the chat box said that they're bullish on Block Digest views, so maybe we should just summarize what we've managed to accomplish in 150 episodes. So we started off, I don't know how many followers the Twitter account had when we started doing the show, because actually the Twitter account was made before the show, or it was at least held before the show, or the account was. But I think the Twitter account now has something like 2,300 followers, and we have somewhere around the same number of subscribers on the YouTube channel as well. And the views are pretty consistent. We usually get somewhere around 500 episode. But apparently people are bullish on that, so who knows where that's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm bullish on the artwork. I know that that was something we kind of promised at the beginning of the season, and that introductory art with the theme, that was something that we've really enjoyed this season. I know that the theme song's been a hit, and thanks again, Fried Noodles, and I really enjoy it. But we do have the continuation of that to where you know, next season we I imagine in the hiatus we'll play around a little bit with that other streaming app to get that all done up right. So yeah, definitely bullish on Block Digest.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let everyone know, because maybe you don't. We actually we curate all of the episodes into each of the seasons. So this is season 5, and you can see the playlists on the YouTube channel if you want to go back through episodes and see them in order. We also have, besides this, you know, main string of shows, we also have done special edition shows, which are specifically interviews with specific people. They're a lot shorter, usually about an hour. And then we also have a even shorter series, which is called ZK Snacks, that Shinobi and I have been doing about specific topics, like basically doing explainer videos on one thing. I believe we did so far the Bitfury surveillance software. We did the one on the Lightning Network, which was my favorite, because actually that got used at the Lightning Hack Days. And I can't remember the third one was Segwit and ASIC Boost. The differences between the two ASIC boosts, because some people are still messing those two up and refusing to not do that.
Yeah, it's been a good mix of content. Good 150 episodes under the belt.
So
I still
maybe I would
have to do my TMZ parody show where I pretend to be a Bcasher who believes all the crazy Bcash shit.
Well, the problem with that, Shinobi, is that I'm being more ridiculous than the actual Bcash people.
Great,
I don't know
then
if
it'll
that
be
would work.
awesome content.
I mean, the one thing I would be curious about, I mean, you can either leave a comment or say it right now in the troll box, but I'd be interested to know what other kinds of show formats people think we should do, or show formats that we're already doing, like the special edition or the ZK Snacks, if they would like to see more of one of those in particular. Another one we had, which was spearheaded by Adam and his girlfriend, Deja, was the interview series specifically about privacy developments in Bitcoin, which is also a playlist on the channel.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Like, you know, over this break, it'd be good to, you know, ask again for a little feedback on, you know, what you guys think that we should be doing, and if everything's going right, or what you like or don't like, and all that. And you know, yeah, say again, we haven't said it in a while, but you know, the mumble's still out there. You drop in there during the hiatus. Got some questions or comments too.
All right, Chris, cough up some thoughts.
Are we shooting the shit? Is that what's going on right now? It's my favorite part of the show. Okay, let's think. Code is hard. Discuss. It's hard. It's hard to think about all the problems. Like listening to you talk, because I haven't been around. I'm really sorry about that. But like just drifting in and out, coming back, and I hear you talk about it should do this. Whenever you say we should do it like this, what you're doing is protocol design. And I have kind of a new appreciation for it, because you know my recent forays have taken me into meeting people that are way smarter than me, and a specialist, you know, in security, and just being around those kinds of people, listening to them talk, watching them work, you know how much you don't know. And so when we talk about stuff like the Glacier protocol, for example, that came up in the chat, all of these kinds of things, it is very hard to execute this well. And let me answer actually the question that came up in the chat, which was, do I like Glacier? I've read it. I have a lot of appreciation for that style of thinking, for that way of thinking. Do I think it's right for 99% of the people in crypto? No, because what they're asking you to do is set up 2 simultaneous air-gapped devices. They're asking you to write out by hand. The keys, I think both public and private from memory, have to be written out by hand. That gives an opportunity for, you know, mistakes to be made. But don't worry, because there are so many fail-safes in this protocol that any mistake will be discovered. The problem is the amount of time and just the frustration that you would go through to execute on that means that I think it's Kirchhoff's, if I'm saying his name right, 6th principle, which is that if the usability of a security system is bad enough, then nobody will use it and therefore it won't be secure. And so the usability, I think that would be my takeaway for 2018, would be the usability of security is not appreciated enough. People do not pay it enough attention. And that for me, it has to be, I just recently watched the Steve Jobs movie with that Fassbender guy who was playing the lead role. And I remember, I've read Jobs' biography a couple of times now, and it was all about bringing computers to the people. And the problem with Jobs was that he was just a bit too early. But in Wozniak, the CTO, he found an engineer who was willing to do the work that many, many other engineers just were not willing to do. And that was to make a beautiful, elegant user interface so that ordinary people, the pragmatists, as we call them in business, would want to adopt this kind of technology, because Jobs didn't want IBM to become the Bell, the telephone company of computing. They didn't want IBM to become the information company in 50 years, where they would just own it. And most engineers didn't see the merit of making windows with beveled edges and drop shadows and things like this. They just didn't see the utility for it. And unfortunately for Jobs, he was just a bit too early. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, if you're too early, it's as bad as being too late. But he managed to ride it out. He made a comeback. And a lot of his instincts as a product designer, wouldn't go so far as to call him a product designer, but as an ideator, as a high-level visionary, were absolutely right. He resonated with people, and he was able to communicate to them in a design ethic where people wanted to use those devices. They were drawn to them. They had a sort of magnetism, not like Facebook. That's a different type. That's a kind of a pernicious, kind of an evil intent there at Facebook, where they want you to keep going back, where they use your friends against you to keep you sticky on the content. Apple never had that kind of intention. It was all about creating a delightful experience. It was like driving a luxury car where you would want it. It was really about status. He was selling you status, to the point now where probably the last 10 years or so, Apple have really been in the business of selling gadgets. They don't even sell computers anymore. I mean, the computing is just, it's like Amazon don't do retail, right? Amazon basically gather data about your habits as a consumer, and then recommend products to you. And then basically the whole market, the whole market they're in is about getting, distributors and manufacturers and so on to use their service. So in a similar way, Apple don't really do computing anymore. The computing is highly, highly commoditized, to the point where they could do it with their eyes closed. The business they're really in is about looking at new sort of use case, new users. When they do their usability research at Apple, okay, they don't do a ground up approach where like, what's the market asking for? No. They interview a bunch of people, and then they only listen to the minority. They try to find in all these people, who are the next people we want to build for. They might be a minority, but they're a significant minority, and we think that they're important. And we just want to build for them, and we want to make them the new kind of, the new populace. And we want to bring them to other people. We want to bring these people's desires to everybody. We want to show everyone why what these people are asking us for is actually what everyone should be asking for. And that's what Apple do really well. And I think they're unique in that. And that's probably the reason why they're the most cash-rich business. And so we have to think that way, because in crypto, I often wonder to myself, as in cryptocurrency, actually both cryptography and in cryptocurrency, like, who's the Wozniak? Who's the developer that's going to do the work that other developers don't want to do? And I don't just mean about making bubblegum apps, because anyone can fucking make a bubblegum app these days. I'm talking about actually thinking about user habits. Like, has anyone actually sat down a group of users with a walleting system and measured their heart rate and their perspiration, and taken them through a red lane of a product, like a wallet software, taking them through a red lane? That means give them the most commonly used set of features, one after the other. So, you initialize your wallet, you have to back it up, you have to write it down, you have to remember a passphrase, maybe get some Electrum on the go, or whatever you're doing. You're pairing your Trezor with your computer. Go through that, and the whole time through, record them both from behind and from the front. Take heart strap, chest monitor, measure their heart rate, measure perspiration, and look for the areas where they get the most anxious. And then just show the engineers that footage and make the engineers feel the pain of the end user so that you get this empathy on the go, right? Then you start to feel it. Then now the engineer sees it. They really see on the front line, what is this doing to our customers? And you just want to focus the engineer's efforts on those particular pain points. You do everything, of course, you need to do the protocol design, you do everything for the security, but when it comes to usability, you just focus on the parts that are most anxious. For example, I can tell you from my own research that the most anxiety inducing event in the red lane right now is doing a firmware update. So, okay, you backed up your keys, you wrote them down, yes, you did all of that, and hopefully you've stored them in a safe place. But now you've got a mandatory firmware upgrade. Oh, fuck. Does that mean I have to check my backup? How do I check my backup? I only bought one device. Do I need to buy another one? Because then you realize, well, if I wipe this device to test it, then I won't have a backup anymore. I'll only have one copy of the private key. And so what's happening now is that because as engineers, you haven't predicted the model, you haven't really modeled the reality for your user, they're now coming up against a problem that you should have anticipated. And that's what I think this industry really needs. It needs people that the whole stuff with the security needs to just keep on going, but then people really need to start specializing in the usability. And fuck all this like gaming bullshit. Fuck, like the hell with Facebook and all this crap. We're putting way too much energy into the wrong things. This particular area that I'm talking about right now, usable security, is the thing for 2019 that someone really needs to sit down and hammer out. Rant's done. Let's shoot the shit. Go. Riff.
Man, I think that was well said, man. I mean, like, I think we are actually kind of heading in that direction. I mean, like, there are people putting together products for, like there's the Casa hold a multi-sig service in the node because people want to, they want to have that node and that setup and be your own bank, personal, Swiss bank account, all that stuff. They want it, but they can't technically set it up. And so, we do have people that are building those sort of products. And, the Samurai Wallet guys are trying to build out this node that you can use in SPV with, more privacy and everything. And I think that we're getting there. And like, once we have those tools, it'll just be easier to do these measurements to see like where exactly people get so stressed out. I mean, like, you're absolutely right on firmware updates. That's one that just hit me not too long ago, where when it came in, I was just like, oh man, I got a seat. I'm like worried and everything. But I mean, eventually, as these new basically areas are being built out of this market, I think that it'll build the market research to where we'll get there. And yeah, I think you're right on 2019. It's like the usability feature is something that is gonna, it really needs to come out and be at the forefront. I mean, I think we're seeing it not just with these services and these nodes, but guys like Jack Mallers in the Zap wallet, building a GUI to where people are more comfortable. I mean, it's getting there, but for right now, for a long time, it's just been like, how are we going to scale? How are we going to scale? And now it's like,
That's part of the scaling story, though. That is part of the scaling story. And we should be promoting, right. In 2019, I'll make a pledge to turn up on here or do it more often. And I think what we should do is we should celebrate the companies that are doing this well. I don't think we should use so much stick. I think we should mostly focus on carrot. So we don't necessarily put down the companies that are doing it badly, but I think we should be promoting. And I think, first of all, got to pay tribute to Adam at Wasabi, which I've taken out for some test runs. I've been recording, the various interactions on my screen and studying it. And actually, given the complexity that Adam is trying to convey, they do a very good job with UX, considering how complex it is necessarily because of what you're being asked to do. So I think, those kinds of initiatives I think initially we shouldn't just obviously never aim for perfection, because you're setting yourself up for fail. So we can't expect an Apple-like product today. And you have to also consider that in business and startup culture, especially when, you know, entrepreneurs come to do all the business planning, you know, one of the things that they have to look at is, well, why can't a more well-established player just come in and crush us? Like, what, you know, we could go off and do all this stuff, but if Apple just take a look at us and go, well, we can just do that in a heartbeat, and we've got so much money, we just keep throwing stuff at it, and we already know how to make stuff beautiful. Well, one of the reasons why Apple would never touch this is because it's just too hot for them. You know, crypto is probably just way too hot for Apple. I think eventually that a lot of these companies will get there, but that's a war for another day. For now, I think we just have to celebrate the ones that are doing it right. Maybe get them on here, get them to talk about it. We should interview more UX people that are either crypto curious or in our industry.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, yeah, no par and Adam with you know, with the Wasabi wallet. That's also another one of those you know, pieces of equipment that got built out this year. That's just incredible, and you know, it's good to see all that stuff. And I think that's a great idea. You know, just like kind of try and help you know, promote these products that are being built out that are going to be very helpful. So yeah, let's we're over at 2.5 hours now. Like final thoughts, I guess, is the we've done the chit chat now. So the final thought. All right. Let's go with, I'm gonna start us off here and say that yeah, I've been really excited about what's going on in the meetup space around here, and you know, seeing a bunch of blockchain guys come over and ask questions about Bitcoin, and you know, they're kind of like taking you know, it looks like they're taking another look at Bitcoin, and you know, that they're getting interested, and I mean, that's for all sorts of various reasons. And you know, it's been a hard year, you know, with the market and, you know, people and the running the meetup and everything, but I mean, like, overall, I think it's built, like, we're finishing out this year very strong when it comes to people in this area trying to understand how this system is going to be useful and like where we can take it. And so on that note, we got the Bitcoin and Beer meetup run by Blockchain around here, and that's going to be on January 1st. And we got a Bitcoin get together on January 3rd, 10-year network anniversary party, people. So if you're in the area, let's have a couple of drinks and celebrate. All right, I'll say it. Shinobi, go. Final thought. I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you take it last. I'm going to put you second.
I want to see Bitmain burn.
All right, there's a thought.
Short and sweet. I like it.
Janine, final thought.
Well, Shinobi might want. Yeah, there we go. So this is a tweet that I had saved in my calendars to specifically bring up at the new year because it's the end of 2018, and Peterson predicted actually exactly 1 year ago today that there would be a mass extinction event in Bitcoin nodes or Bitcoin in general, and that BCH nodes would take over. Well, I guess we learned our lesson, didn't we? Because the opposite happened.
Definitely so. All right, Chris, I know we got a lot of thinking out of you, but you got a final thought for us before we end the season out?
I mean, you could just do, I think we should do like blast from the past, where we show tweets and claims that people have made, like that one that you just showed would be really good. Because in this industry, you're never going to be short of bullshit that you could go through, like the Ethereum and thread that we put up. You know, look at what people said, hold people accountable for the claims that they make.
All right, I like that. Toby, you want to take us out?
All right, guys. Well, that is season 5. So see you guys next year. Adios.
Bye.
Happy New Year.
Bye. Bye.